a conjunction between Saturn and Pluto. So if you guys don't know, I'm Abigail Barella with Sparkle and Shine Guidance, and this conjunction between Pluto and Saturn, it happens, so the last one was 1982 to 83, so pretty long ago. However, some of us were alive during that time, and there was a lot of shifts and changes happening in the 80s around the economy. So whenever we have Pluto, the lord of the underworld, or unearthing things, and we have Saturn, the lord of time and duty and responsibility, when they are conjunct each other, they're working together to unearth more of our personal responsibilities, but definitely as a society. So if we look at Pluto, particularly in Capricorn, Pluto has a cycle, goes around the whole zodiac. So we know zodiac is basically the band of animals, however, they're not all animals, that surround the Earth. So we are on this big rock called planet Earth that's moving. It's not only rotating, but it's also moving through time and space. And every time it rotates, right, certain things change and shift in a 24-hour period, depending on what time you were born. The place where the constellation of Capricorn is what we're going to be talking a lot about. However, I wanted to give you a bigger scope of why we're talking about it. Why is this important, this transit of Pluto and Saturn conjunct each other, okay? So Pluto in Capricorn, the last time it was in Capricorn, because remember, 248 years, it cycles around the zodiac, whereas the sun cycles around the zodiac in a year, right? We just turned into a Gemini season, depending on when you're watching this. And so how quickly the sun, right, the sun moves is different than how fast Pluto moves. Pluto is much slower. So in 1762, 1777, that would be the American Revolution. That would be the birth of this country. And the Industrial Revolution as well was the last time that Pluto was in Capricorn. That's a pretty big signal or sign that we are moving into uncharted territories. We have a really big election coming up in 2020 as well. And so I want to talk about the significance of Capricorn, and there's so many other things that I want to also say. If you are feeling right now in your life just this kind of uncertainty and this bigger energy that's happening, you are not alone. Actually, if you look at the Schumann resonance, it has been off the charts. What the Schumann resonance is measuring is the electromagnetic field on planet Earth. They are higher than they've ever been. We are being forced into awakening. We are being forced into coming into new consciousness. And that's really uncomfortable, not only for us, but for government, for systems. If we're all evolving and changing, guess what? The government and system is also going to have to do that. We also know that Pluto is the lord of the underworld. He brings things to the surface that we don't want to see, so that we have to look at them, so that we have to grow and change. And it's from that growth and change that we regain our power, our inherent power, the power that we were, that's just part of our soul being that we lose, having to be raised, having to go through the process of being a baby. That's like the most it's just like the most vulnerable and unpowerful time, right? So you think about this process of being a soul, being all powerful and like really working on things, and then having to become a baby, and then being a child and being told like, no, you don't know what you're doing, and no, having to go to school, which is a bigger system like the government, and it's regulated by the government. And so you think of all these things of separating us from our personal power. Not only that, that's if you have a quote unquote normal experience, right? If you are someone who has trauma, who had a really horrible childhood, then you're even farther separated from that personal power. But guess what? Pluto's there to bring you back to it. So even though it does it in the most uncomfortable ways, that is the purpose of Pluto, to unearth in your subconscious mind, your personal power, okay? And so Pluto is going to be the most significant part of this conjunction, because Pluto and Neptune, which I'm going to talk about, they are the rulers of two very important areas of our consciousness. the underworld, our subconscious, and Neptune, the ultra conscious, the godly conscious, the spiritual consciousness that we all, the Christ consciousness that we all have access to. However, we've forgotten. We had to drink from the river of forgetfulness and forget our connection to source in order to be here, in order to be human. Okay, so my phone is not going to continue to record, and I am recording this for my YouTube channel. So if you're not already subscribed, it's just Sparkle and Shine Guidance, and you'll want to subscribe there if you want to see this full video. Okay, so the last time Pluto was in Capricorn was a really long time ago, 248 years to be exact, and big things happened. Now let's talk about Saturn. Saturn has a transit of about 30 years. We talk about the Saturn return, 29 years, 30 years, and Saturn has to do with restrictions, has to do with duty, dealing with the earthly realm. If you look at the symbology of Saturn, it is all about being on planet Earth. It's like, whoosh, you're here, deal with your shit, get your shit together, ground in, you can't just live in the clouds. And so the Saturn return brings responsibility, right? And so when we're talking about Saturn in Capricorn, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. So it's in its home sign. It has more power, it has more responsibility, and it has to do, again, with systems, government. All of those things are Capricorn things, okay? So when we're talking about that, we're talking about unearthing uncomfortable things from the system, from the government. We're talking about duty and our personal responsibility to fit into the system. So we're going to want to look to where this is happening in your birth chart, right? Because your birth chart is a snapshot of your soul's map, your soul's blueprint, so that you know how to navigate. And so we need to look at that to understand how this huge transit that's upsetting literally every human on this planet, but it's doing so that we can create change. Hi, how are you guys doing? Oh, it's so good to see you guys on here. I know, sorry, I'm trying to keep it simplified. Okay. We are also in a nodal cycle. What are the nodes? The north and the south node are our soul's dharma and karma. The soul's dharma and karma are the nodes of the moon. We have the south node, which shows us where we've been, our past, our skills, our tools that we can use in this lifetime. Also, maybe some of the things that we need to work out from the last lifetime. Our north node is where our soul wants us to go. If the soul was driving the car, it's where it would take us. That's the north node. You want to know where your natal north node is. It's probably the most important thing to know in astrology. Where's your natal north node, okay? But collectively, when we have the transiting nodes, which are a cycle of about 18 months, we want to know where that's happening in your chart. Well, guess what? The south node, where our collective past has been, is in Capricorn right now. This is hugely important because those eclipses, every time we get an eclipse in this cycle, it's lighting it up even more. And so when do we get eclipses? We get eclipses about every 6 months. The next eclipse will be in July, depending on when you're watching this. And it's in Cancer. And the north node in Cancer is leading us. Our soul's trying to lead us through the heart, through nurturing, through self-love, through also caring for others, welcoming others in. And so you want to know where these eclipses are happening for you. And it's also going to show you, because Capricorn is where this conjunction is happening. So when I'm talking about each one of the houses, it's going to help you to understand, if you know your birth chart, which you can get for free at astro.com. You can also set up a chart reading with me, which is going to not only give you shit tons of information and material to work with, but also your chart and a knowledge of your chart, so that you can look to these houses for all of these videos, which can help you in innumerable amounts of ways. Okay, so I don't even know if that's the right way to say that, but we want to understand that this conjunction is very unique because we have the north and the south node also showing us things, okay? And the other thing that's unique that's happening all throughout this year is that we have Jupiter and in its home sign of Sagittarius, and we have Neptune in its home sign of Pisces. And these transits have never been seen before on this planet altogether, okay? So I just want you to know how unique this time period is. When you're like looking for guidance, when you're like trying to understand why things are so crazy right now, this is uncharted territory for your soul. This is uncharted territory. You signed up for this because you wanted to learn these lessons. So here we are. Here we are. We're all here and we're all helping each other. And so that's why it's really helpful to reach out for guidance, right? So when we're talking about this big transit, we want to know where it's happening personally for us. And before I get to each of the houses, you want to understand that it's happening, oh geez, did I write down the exact degree? Basically from 20 to 22 degrees of Capricorn. So it's important to know that depending on what house system you follow, you want to know where this is happening by looking at the exact degree. 20 to 22 degrees of Capricorn is going to show you where this conjunction is happening. The nodal cycle, we're looking at the whole house of Capricorn, and that video, I have a separate video on my YouTube that you can check out around the North and the South node that will also give you good information about this cycle, because it's an 18-month cycle for the nodes. And for this conjunction, it basically is starting now. We're moving into it. We're getting little tastes, little bites of it, so that when it hits full force in 2020, we're not going to be totally knocked off of our bottoms here, okay? So pay attention to the Schumann resonance. The thing about astrology is basically a tool for us to read the energy, right? Energy is everything. Everything is energy. When people, I always laugh so hard when all these men that have all these like fancy degrees are like, you know, I'm not talking about the woo-woo energy stuff. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like everything is energy. So you basically just denied science. Like, it's just so interesting to me. And this is what we're coming into, the more feminine, like, hello, like common sense. The feminine actually has more common sense than the masculine, and in ways that are very practical. So if you look at the Cancer energy, where the North Node is leading us, it's to our heart, but it's also to the really practical. Like, let's just get really practical here. And it's really interesting because Capricorn is actually also a feminine sign. It just has a masculine ruler. Saturn is very masculine. So it has that kind of mix of both. And there's the shadow side and there's the light side of every sign. So hi, how are you guys doing? So when we're talking about Capricorn, we're going to be talking about the light side of Capricorn and the dark side of Capricorn. And I want you to remember that Pluto, although it unearths things that we don't want to see, because we like everything to be balanced and beautiful and lovely, it still is very necessary in our lives to get to those lessons that we came here to learn, okay? So without any further ado, I'm going to go house by house about how this might. Everybody's different. And it's so interesting to me where I can say, you know, if this is in your first house, you might be dealing with this, this, this. And then someone comes up to me and is like, actually, I wasn't dealing with any of this, but I was dealing with this other thing. And it's totally first house issue in my, you know, in my mind. So remember that these are just ideas, and it's really interesting to see how it manifests personally for everybody and how it's different. So you're going to want to look to where 20 to 22 degrees of Capricorn is in your birth chart to understand this more specifically. The first house, if you have the Saturn and Pluto conjunction happening in your first house, the first house is about your personal identity. It's about your physical body and how you show up in the world and how you're seen by people when they first meet you. So if this conjunction is happening here, it's unearthing some serious power. So we know that Pluto is about power, but sometimes how it gets that power is uncomfortable. So there might be things coming up about your identity. I mean, to use an extreme example, you might do a DNA test and find out like your father's not actually your father. You know, like it's a really unearthing, but also a time period for you to come into that power as a person in your personal identity. So there's things that might come up around just your duty and responsibilities and having to deal with things about the way that you show up in the world that might be uncomfortable, but bring you more power. If this is happening in your second house, so we're talking about the Pluto and Saturn conjunction that is starting to happen. We're getting little bites and pieces, but is fully happening in 2020. But it's such a big conjunction that we want to start talking about it. If it's happening in your second house, this has to do with your resources, your personal finances, your boundaries as a human. And so if this conjunction is happening here, it's really, really, really important for you to look at your personal finances, make a plan for the next 2 years, because there's going to be things unearthed. There's going to be things that have to be dealt with that have to do with your individual resources. So if you are in a marriage, if you are in a business partnership, start understanding what's yours personally and what's ours collectively as a group or as a partnership. Okay, it's really important that you build your personal finances. I love that someone's comment on here. So sorry if you're watching on YouTube. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to read that later. Okay, I'm so excited to see. I would be curious where this conjunction's happening in your birth chart, right? So, okay, so we're talking about the second house. Sorry, to get back to business. I'm trying, I want to read your comments. I'm going to have to go back and look at this and read comments later. So your personal finances, your resources, get that stuff straightened away. Even if you love your partner and you're in a great partnership, make sure you're saving for yourself. Make sure that you have your own resources, da-da-da-da. Third house, if this conjunction of Pluto and Saturn is happening in your third house, communication, the 3 C's, communication, community, and commerce. Okay, this is about relating to others, sharing ideas, interchanging ideas. This actually might be a time where new ideas get unearthed for you. A new career in sales or community or communication could come to the surface here, but also really, 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 really important to have a solid structure for yourself around your personal communication. So you might want to take a new class, you might want to build those skills so that you have more to offer. Also, things might get unearthed in your communication space or with siblings or sibling dynamics. Fourth house, if this is happening in your fourth house, we're talking about the Pluto and Saturn conjunction. This is your house of foundation family, and it's Cancer's house. It's the house opposite the 10th house, which is Capricorn's house. Why this is important is that there's foundational things that need to get unearthed so that you can soar, so that you can take off in the next 5 years, 10 years. Okay, so this is a more longer term. It might be a more uncomfortable transit. If you have this transit happening, you might want to work with an astrologer. Fourth house is really how you feel at home in your body, but also on planet Earth. So when uncomfortable things are being unearthed here, it can really throw off your center. It can throw off your stable foundation. But the whole purpose is that foundation wasn't as solid as you thought it was to begin with, and there's things that need to get dug out and removed so that you can have a stronger foundation. So again, a good place to have that solid work. And that also means that Cancer is in your 10th house, which is showing you the self-nurturing and also the nurturing that you can offer to others, but you can't really do that unless you do your own solid foundational work. Fifth house, if you have this transit happening in your 5th house, this is your house of creation, creativity. It's the house of Leo, so it's all about play and movement and joy and romanticism and the muse and just like getting inspired and big ideas and just like having fun. Well, then you have Capricorn here, which is all about like, let's have a plan and let's not have too much fun. So when you have this conjunction happening in your 5th house, it's really important to schedule in playtime and schedule in work time to have new ideas, but to actually take action on them. So things might be unearthed here around really kind of uncomfortable ways that you might be too scattered or too spread too thin, and you have to deal with them so that you can create form. And so you might have to have some restrictions or personal restrictions for yourself here that don't feel great, that make you unhappy, but in the long term are going to actually help you bring those creative ideas into fruition. Because obviously, if we don't have that solid foundation again, they're not going to be able to take off. So that's what the 5th house is about. It's also about like play in romantic, like romantic relationships. And so when you have that conjunction happening, you might not notice you're having as much fun in those areas. And it might be a signal to you to kind of dive in deeper. And it might not be a time where you're supposed to like be having lots of fun in your romantic relationships. It might be kind of like a deeper dive time. Sorry. Sixth house. If you have this transit happening in your sixth house, this is work, health, daily routines, rituals, service to the self first, but service to others. And since it's the house of work and your physical health, you really want to be taking good care of your physical health, take care of your bones, take care of your joints, take care of your teeth. You know, all of those things are sixth house. And as this gets unearthed, it's really vital and important to remember that whatever is getting unearthed has a higher purpose. And if you have the support built in from the beginning, so you know this is happening in your sixth house, you set that support, you set up your naturopath, you set up your, protocols, your vitamins and minerals that strengthen these areas so that you're not so caught off guard. The other thing with the sixth house is, since it's daily routines and rituals, it also rules pets. And so things might come up with pets. I'm like looking at my dog. I don't have this happening in my sixth house, thank goodness. But, things might get unearthed here in terms of caring for other beings that you care for on a daily basis. That's enough about that. Seventh house, marriage, partnership. If you have this transit happening in your seventh house, guess what? Things might be unearthed in your partnership. Things might be unearthed. So it's all partnerships. So if you have a business partnership, if you're married to someone and you have a business partnership and you have this happening in your seventh house, you're going to want to call in extra support. You're going to want to call in some serious work in these areas, because if you don't deal with the stuff, it can come up in a really not fun way. So divorce is very possible if you have this placement, but it's also possible that you're able to work with these energies and work together through them to have a stronger foundational relationship. So if you have this transit happening in your eighth house, and again, we're talking about Pluto Saturn transit, it's a long-term transit, it's a long-term conjunction, because Pluto moves so darn slow, and Saturn is going through a retrograde right now, and then it's going to catch back up. So there's a lot of things shifting, and we're getting little glimpses, but we're really talking about a longer cycle, and we want to start preparing. We want to start preparing so that we're not caught so off guard. Okay. So eighth house is other people's resources, personal transformation. It's like the house of the phoenix. And so if you have this in your eighth house, it could mean you get an inheritance. It could mean that you also might lose some money. It could mean that you gain some money. It could mean that you learn a lot about dealing with others with resources. If the second house is personal resources and you're going to want to check that, then the eighth house is things that are out of your control in terms of resources. And we're not just talking about money here. And when we have Pluto that rules the eighth house, in the eighth house, conjunct your Saturn, your duty, your responsibilities, you're going to have to look at some things that are really uncomfortable. It might even be having to do with loss, with death, but it also is gain. So it's a confusing house, but it is all for the purpose of transformation and personal power. So be aware of that. If you have this in your eighth house, remember that the goal is more personal power, and it might be a good placement for working with me because it's intense. Ninth house has to do with opening and expanding the mind, travel, education, everything that brings in more information. We know that there's so much in the house of the ninth house that has to do with sharing information, being a teacher, being a leader. And so when we have this transit in the ninth house, you're probably going to be someone that's helping more people than just yourself, than just your family. It's at a bigger scale. If that's not the case, it might be a time for you to learn about working with people in a bigger scale. So if you have this in the ninth house, it could also have to do with a personal journey, like, a trip to India or something like that, where you're being called to serve in a bigger way that was very unexpected. The 10th house, if you have this transit happening in your 10th house, which is the house of Saturn, it's the house of Capricorn, so it's like triple, quadruple whammy, then this is going to be a really, really important transit, an important time for you to listen, to be guided, to have the resources that you need, to ask for the resources that you need, because the 10th house is your how people view you in your vocation, in your work in the world. And when you have this uncomfortable transit of Pluto and Saturn, you're being forced to show up in a bigger way in your work. You're being forced to share more with others and to really set aside the personal ego and really open to service. We say that the 6th house is service, but the 6th and the 10th house are related. They trine each other, and they're both earth houses. They have to do with the earthly realm. So you can't get your head stuck in the clouds. This is a time for you to really, push yourself further in your work and not be held back. And again, ask for the support and the help that you need in your work in the world. 11th house has to do with organizations, friendships, also your future goals and planning for those, and really kind of being eccentric or daring when you're thinking about future goals. Hi, how are you guys doing? I'm talking about the house system and going through each of the houses because we're talking about the Pluto-Saturn conjunction that's coming into focus now and we'll be working with through 2021. Okay, and this is why I'm making a video about it, is because it's so huge and so important, and it really is guiding us to a bigger kaboomy awakening. So when you have this transit happening in your 11th house, you really want to be aware of your resources in terms of friendships, who you can rely on, who you can work together with, collaborations. And then also your future goals. So setting those goals, and things might be on earth that are out of your control and that you can't really do anything about, but you still need to stay in focus with where you're wanting to go and who you're wanting to help. 11th house is a lot about others, like really assisting others. And I don't know how to delete you, but I would if I could. And then the 12th house has to do with your spiritual. Remember we talked about Neptune is like Christ consciousness. The 12th house is your connection to that, but it's also the house of the unseen. So everyone else can see it in you, but you can't see it. So when you have this transit happening, again, another placement to work with me or work with another healer, because it is going to be kind of mind-blowing, and also it's going to change you in ways you can't imagine. So it's unearthing things from your consciousness. You might have past life visions, you might have past life memories, you might also have just dreams and visions that are just out of this world, because that's what it is. And so you really want to work with this energy in a very spiritual way, and you do not want to turn or shun away from spirit and from source. So this is a time to tune in and tap in. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was a lot of information that might have been maybe a little too much, depending on what your knowledge of astrology is. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more, please subscribe. Also, please comment below with which house this is happening for you, and if it resonates what we were talking about. I want you guys to know that, like, it can go either way. There's the shadow and the light, and I didn't talk much about the shadow going through the 12 houses because I don't think that helps you, but I think that it's really important to know that any uncomfortable work that you're doing is exactly where you're supposed to be. If you're just like, la, 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 everything's fine, you're probably not digging in and doing the work that needs to be done. So if you're actually having an uncomfortable time, it's actually a good sign that you're doing the work. So congratulations, yay. And, looking at this last conjunction time period for Saturn and Pluto was 1982 to 1983. So those people born during that time are actually going to be great helpers. They have the opportunity to be great helpers during this transit. So just remember that as well. I hope you have a great day. And if you want to reach out for a reading, just click the link in my profile, and you can even set up a free call with me or Kristen, and we can help you get aligned and have more information to work with to really grow and flourish and shine brighter. Have a great day.